Margaret Hamilton pressed a crying infant into the arms of a stranger, her hands trembling as though even her bones carried guilt. Beside her, George Hamilton refused to meet the baby's eyes. Hello, my beautiful listeners. Welcome back to another powerful story. If you haven't subscribed yet, kindly hit that button so you don't miss the next one. Child's name was Catherine, barely 2 weeks old, wrapped in a thin blanket that did little to shield her from the night's cold. The stranger asked one last time, "Are you certain?" Margaret's lips quivered. She will survive. Better without us. And with that, they turned their backs. Years passed, and the Hamilton household grew in wealth and reputation. Their halls glittered with polished wood, fine chandeliers, and laughter from parties that carried on till dawn. But in the quiet hours, when guests had gone and servants swept the floors, Margaret sometimes sat by the fire and whispered a single name under her breath, Catherine. George never spoke of it. He buried the memory like an unwanted corpse. Though Catherine had been left behind, life carried her forward. She grew in another's home, unaware of her true bloodline. Yet rumors had a way of traveling. The villagers whispered, "Did you know the Hamiltons once had a daughter?" Most dismissed it. Others swore they'd seen a child with Margaret long ago. But with no proof, the whispers faded into shadow. In the grand Hamilton mansion, one relic refused to be destroyed, a faded portrait of a baby girl hidden away in George's study. Margaret stumbled upon it one evening while searching for old letters. Her heart clenched. She wanted to take it down, to burn it, but her hand froze. Tears blurred her sight. She whispered, "Forgive me, my Catherine." The Hamiltons raised their other children with perfection. To outsiders, they were the ideal family. To insiders, silence was a glue holding them together. No one dared mention the missing child. But Margaret's eyes often wandered during family dinners, her gaze lingering on the empty seat that no one else noticed. One stormy evening, Richard, the eldest Hamilton son, searched through his father's desk looking for an old document. His fingers brushed against a yellowed envelope, worn with age. Curious, he pulled it out. Inside lay a photograph, creased, fragile, and unmistakable. It was of a baby girl. On the back, in Margaret's handwriting, was a single name, Catherine. Richard froze. The discovery gnawed at Richard. Who was Catherine? Why had he never heard of her? He confronted his mother, but Margaret broke into tears and begged him to let it rest. George, however, was furious. "That name is not to be spoken in this house again," he roared. But it was too late. The silence that had held the family together for years had finally cracked. Sleep abandoned Richard that night. He stared at the photograph again and again, memorizing every detail of the baby's face. A round cheek, half a smile, eyes too innocent for the cruelty that followed. His heart thundered with questions. Why had his parents hidden this? Where was Catherine now? And why did the thought of her stir such an ache in his chest? He slipped the photograph under his pillow. The truth would not be buried again. Margaret wandered through the corridors of the mansion like a ghost. For years she had locked away her sin, pretending it had never happened. But Catherine's name, once whispered, now roared in her ears. She returned to the fire that night, holding her rosary, whispering broken prayers. "God, forgive me. I was weak. I was afraid. But she was my child." Tears dripped into her lap, each one a confession. George Hamilton drank heavily in his study, the decanter emptying faster than usual. He could not bear the look in Richard's eyes, nor the pity in Margaret's. To him, Catherine was not a daughter but a mistake, a stain he had spent years erasing. But rage boiled beneath his skin. He struck the desk with his fist. "That girl will not return. She is nothing to us." Yet deep down, even George feared what might happen if the truth escaped the walls of their home. Weeks later, a man arrived in town, tall, weary, carrying a leather satchel. He asked questions in hushed tones, his eyes searching every face. The villagers whispered about him. Some said he was a lawyer, others a messenger of secrets. But when Richard crossed paths with him in the market, the man asked a single question that sent chills down his spine. "Do you know where Catherine Hamilton lives?" Richard's heart pounded at the stranger's question. He hesitated, masking his shock with a half-smile. "I've never heard of her," he lied. But the man's piercing eyes lingered on him too long, as though peeling away the layers of deceit. That night, Richard returned to the mansion restless. The photograph under his pillow suddenly felt heavier than ever. He whispered to himself, "If she is alive, then I must find her." The stranger's presence unsettled Margaret. When she learned someone was asking about Catherine, her knees weakened. In the privacy of her room, she clutched her chest. The walls of silence George had built were crumbling, and she no longer had the strength to hold them up. Richard entered quietly, the photograph in his hand. "Mother," he said softly, "I know. Catherine is real, isn't she?" Margaret broke down, collapsing into her son's arms. She is your sister." When George discovered that Margaret had confessed, his rage was volcanic. He cornered her in the study, his voice low and venomous. "You dare destroy everything I built? One word of that girl's name, and our empire will fall apart. Do you understand?" But Margaret, trembling yet resolute, met his eyes for the first time in years. "It already has. George. The moment we abandoned her, it began to crumble." His hand twitched, hovering as if to strike, but he lowered it. Rage alone could not silence the truth forever. Far away, in a modest home on the edge of town, Catherine sat by a small lamp, reading a worn letter she had carried for years. It was unsigned, but she knew it had been written by her mother. The ink had faded, but the words remained etched in her heart. "Forgive me. One day we will meet again." When she heard footsteps outside and the stranger's knock at her door, Catherine's pulse quickened. She had waited her whole life for answers, but was she ready to face the Hamiltons, the family that had cast her aside? It was a rainy evening when the Hamilton mansion's butler opened the door to find the stranger standing there, and behind him, a young woman with Catherine's eyes. She was grown now, graceful yet modest, her presence carrying a quiet strength. Richard, hearing voices, descended the staircase. His gaze locked on Hayes, and something stirred in his chest. He didn't need anyone to confirm. He knew this was Catherine. When Margaret saw her daughter step into the grand hall, she crumpled to the floor, her body racked with sobs. Years of guilt burst from her like a flood. "My child, my Catherine," she whispered, crawling toward her. Catherine froze, torn between anger and longing. She wanted to push Margaret away, to scream at her for the years of abandonment. But another part of her, the part that had read and reread that faded letter, ached to be held. George stormed in, his voice like thunder. "Get her out of here," he roared, his face red with fury. "She is not part of this family. She never was." The whole fell silent. Catherine stood tall, her eyes meeting his without fear. "You may deny me, sir," she said, her voice steady, "but blood does not deny itself. I carry your name whether you speak it or not." Richard stepped forward, placing himself between George and Catherine. For the first time in his life, he defied his father. "Enough, father. She is my sister, and she deserves to be here." The Hamiltons fractured. Margaret clung to Catherine, begging for forgiveness. Richard became her shield, determined to uncover everything about her lost years. The younger siblings whispered in confusion, unsure whether to embrace the sister they never knew. But George? He isolated himself, drowning in whiskey and rage, plotting how to silence the truth before it destroyed his carefully polished name. The mansion, once filled with cold harmony, now trembled with war. Late that night, Catherine stood by the window of the guest room Richard had given her. She looked out at the sprawling estate, the life she could have had, yet her heart wrestled with pain. Should she stay, forcing her way into a family that had abandoned her? Or should she walk away, carrying only the fragments of love Margaret now offered? As dawn approached, Catherine whispered to herself. The past cannot be erased, but the future is mine to choose. Morning light streamed into the Hamilton mansion, exposing everything the night had tried to hide. Catherine descended the stairs, her step steady, her decision made. The family gathered in tense silence. Margaret's eyes pleaded, swollen from tears. Richard stood firm, ready to defend her. George sat with a glass in his hand, pretending strength while fear gnawed at him. Catherine stopped in the center of the hall, her voice calm but unshakable. I did not come here to beg for a place. I came for the truth. And now that I have it, I can walk forward without chains. Whether you call me daughter or stranger, I am Catherine Hamilton. Nothing can erase that. Her words rang through the mansion like a bell of judgment. Margaret broke down, whispering prayers of forgiveness. Richard's eyes glistened with pride. George turned his face away. His empire of silence finally shattered. Catherine walked toward the door, her head high. At the threshold, she looked back only once, her gaze heavy with both pain and power. You abandoned me once, but I will never abandon myself again. The door closed softly behind her, and with it, the forgotten daughter became unforgettable. Catherine was a child they gave away to protect their name. Yet in the end, it was a name that could never be forgotten. Thank you, my beautiful listeners, for staying with me till the end. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Until then, stay blessed.